The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Back when my mama was still alive, she used to tell me, "Son, if it wasn't for bad luck, you'd have no luck at all." If you were to take one look at me when this all started, all of 25 and limping down the sidewalk to the local shithole bar called the Rusty Nail, you'd be inclined to agree. One thing to know about my bad luck was that it liked to stalk my firsts. Mama, she called it the curse of the firsts. My first words were, uh-oh. My first steps saw me toddling right off the front porch, where I broke my first bone. My first tooth I ever lost, I aspirated the damn thing right into my windpipe. I can remember my mum's screams as she dangled me upside down and pounded the hell out of my back, the little enamel shard finally exploding out of me into a puddle of bloody phlegm. After my first kiss, I caught the worst case of herpes you ever saw. My lips looked like raw, crusty hamburger meat. The first time I got drunk, that was a twofer. It happened to coincide with my first vehicle, the week I first got my driver's license. My first car was totaled. A DUI. I bummed rides and rode the bus for the rest of high school. The first time I ever got laid, I knocked the old gal up. It was one of them forbidden high school romances that go hard and fast. We'd used a condom and everything too, but the damn thing broke, and of course she wasn't on the pill. Marissa was her name. She was literally from the other side of the tracks, the right side, not the wrong side like me. I guess that had something to do with what her dad had to say to me when he found out. She called me with the news, how she was 4 weeks late and just had this bad feeling, how her friend had bought a slew of EPTs, how she had 2 lines on the piss test, how she had checked it multiple times. Ever the supportive boyfriend, I headed over to her place as soon as I could. Being as our love was frowned upon by her mom and dad, maybe this wasn't the best of ideas. Maybe we should have arranged for a secret rendezvous, but the situation was dire. I was greeted at the door by her old man, an intense fella that looked like he'd played football in high school and could probably break me in half. He lit into me, fists clenched at his side, a big bulging vein snaking across his forehead. Read me the riot act about how dare I and how could I and what was I thinking, and did I ever even. Read what the Bible had to say about sex before marriage, and his daughter was ruined, and it was my fault. No daughter of mine is going to end up poor white trash, he said at the end of it all. At the time, I wasn't sure if he was implying that a teen pregnancy would confine her to such a fate, or that marrying me would, but being as I now live in a trailer house, maybe it was the latter. He pulled her out of school and I heard they took care of the pregnancy as soon as they could. They moved out of state and I never saw her again. I loved her the way only a teenager within the grips of his first love ever could. I've been scared of girls ever since, because what if the next time is worse? What if the curse has my firstborn in its crosshairs, because maybe fetuses don't count? I graduated high school by the skin of my teeth, entered the real world, floated around for a while until I found a decent job at a roofing company. It was hot as balls and a lot of hard work, but it was the best paying gig my unskilled ass could find. Easy to pick up after a while too. Before I knew it, I was one of the company's favored employees. There was even talk about making me foreman, provided I kept up the good work and stuck around long enough and worked on my Spanish. But was it any wonder the first good-paying job I ever had got fucked up too? I was humping a couple bundles of shingles up the ladder on a 2-story house. It's only in hindsight I remember the empty bottle of Gatorade on the concrete below, the one that had blown off the roof and had gone tumbling down, spilling its contents all down the ladder's top steps, the steps where I slipped. Nothing slowed my fall. I hit the concrete feet first. A shard of bone jutted from shin, and I can still remember its wet, jagged edges staring up at me before I puked and passed out. The repair of my shin and ankle required plates and screws. My first ever surgery. You know where this is going. I developed something called a hardware infection, and from there, sepsis. Fevers and delirium and crashing blood pressure, and weeks in the hospital on IV antibiotics, and undergoing more surgeries on my wasted ankle. I damn near died. This older nurse at the hospital named Nancy, she took a liking to me, some sort of mother hen instincts taking me in. She must have felt bad as I had no visitors. Mama had been dead a couple of years at that point and there was no one else. Not really. A few guys from work came by after I first got admitted, but other than that I was all by my lonesome. Nancy would stay up late and talk with me, tell me how she was going to set me up with her cute little niece. She'd bring me McDonald's and Mountain Dew and magazines. She had a grown son that was no longer talking to her, so maybe I was her adopted son for the time being. Most importantly though, she put me in touch with this personal injury lawyer guy. Long story short, the suit was a success. Even after the lawyer's cut, I was still left with more money than I knew what to do with. Still, I'd have traded it all back in a heartbeat for this to have never happened in the first place. No splashy purchases for me. I decided to hunker down with my little windfall and figure out a way to make it stretch as far as possible. I moved out to this single wide on the backside of this old guy's acreage. He cut me a hell of a deal as long as I checked up on his horses from time to time. It was all I needed. The perfect place to hide out while I nursed my physical and mental wounds. Looking back, living out in that trailer house was the easiest time in my life. Days passed by in a blur of simple routine and laziness. I subsisted on frozen TV dinners and cigarettes and cases of Natty Light. Every morning I'd wake up and zone out for hours in front of the 3 or 4 basic channels that I could pick up on the antenna that was mounted on a pole next to the trailer. I'd stock up on DVDs from the library, sometimes hit up the red box at the Walmarts if I was feeling fancy. I'd end the day on the rickety and splintered deck that served as the trailer's back porch, nurse a beer and cig while I watched the sunset, and listen to the frogs and the crickets and the coyotes, all the time telling myself, just a few more weeks of this and I'll get my shit together. All I need's a little more time. Bill, the hunchbacked old man I was renting the trailer from, kept to himself mostly. I never even saw him ride his horses, but he'd shuffle out and stare at them when I was out there feeding them, tell me how the mare used to be a real wild bitch until he broke her. He liked to wear a shiny belt buckle as big as a dinner plate, something he probably won at some rodeo. But his riding days were over. I doubt he could have hopped on a saddle even if he wanted to. Lest I got too isolated, I made sure to drop by the Rusty Nail a few times a week. It was this shitty little bar a few section lines away from me on the outskirts of town, nothing more than a sheet metal building and a gravel parking lot. Inside, fake wood-paneled walls adorned with neon beer signs and puncture wounds from stray darts. A concrete floor with a couple of crooked pool tables. You could drink at home for cheaper, sure, but not by much. I'd hang out at the bar for a few hours, soak in the conversations that were happening around me, shoot the shit with whoever was working the bar. Enter Rodney. Like myself, he was something of a regular. We got to know each other over a string of tipsy afternoons. He claimed he had known my mum, told me how he'd even tried to date her back in the day, but she'd always shoot him down. She told me she had a thing against roughnecks, he said. Figures. My dad died in an accident on a rig, I said. Damn, I'm sorry. Oil field about killed me too. Back and neck's all fucked up. Hell, I'm collecting my SSI right now. You hang around long enough, I'll show you how to get it. All the right things you gotta do and say. I was thinking of looking for a job eventually. Hell, son, you can't even walk right. Maybe a greeter at Walmart then, I said. There ain't enough Walmart greeter jobs in the world for all the cripples out there. Believe me, I looked. I'd done the math and I was gonna run out of money eventually, even though it was 5 or 6 years down the road. It might be nice to have a backup plan. I decided to hear him out. Whenever Rodney dropped by the Rusty Nail, I'd chat him up. After a while, I reckoned that Rodney fancied himself as some type of father figure to me. He certainly didn't look like any type of daddy I'd want to claim. There was something bulldogish and mean about him, a barrel chest that sprouted thick arms that ended in calloused mitts. He had one of those faces that looked permanently sunburned, his skin the same red complexion no matter the time of year. The stubble on his face was always the same length, like it had decided to stop growing, looking like spilled salt scattered on a red countertop. Slicing through the salt was a narrow mouth, fixed into a constant scowl, except when he was laughing at the expense of someone else. and then it would crack open to reveal 2 rows of perfectly spaced, smaller than average teeth. I could never imagine him sitting in the stands of a little league game unless he was about to brawl with the umpire over a missed call, and I don't think it was common for dads to take their sons back-roading, hours and hours spent kicking up gravel dust and drinking beer from cans, the empties piling up at our feet, chuckling metallically as they skittered around the floorboards. "That shithole gets depressing," he'd say about the rusty nail. "The bar stools hurt my back. I need my sunlight." Somehow I fell into this routine. He'd pull up in his Chevy CK without any advance notice, lay on the horn until I staggered from my trailer and out into the blinding sunlight. This is where I learned about his alternative sources of income. For his bad back, Rodney got 120 Norcos a month and 60 OxyContins. He even convinced his doctor he had anxiety and got 90 Xanax a month as well. Despite his reported bad back, it never seemed to slow him down any. He never limped, never stooped over, never groaned when he tossed the ice chest into the back of his truck. He'd sell his to several guys way out in the boondocks, meth heads and dopers with piles of rusty car parts in their overgrown yards, stolen trailers pulled out back. "You ever get meds for your thing?" Rodney said one day, gesturing a beer toward my ankle. "My ankle? Like for pain?" "Yeah. I had dozens of pill bottles in my medicine cabinet. The orthodoc had felt bad about my multiple complications and had kept the pain, pills coming without me even really asking for them, a bang load of Percocets at first, followed up by plenty of Norcos. I had never liked taking medicine, especially not after what had happened to my mum. She'd gotten the fuck knocked out of her while parked at a stoplight, got strung out on pain pills for a couple of years, would nod off at the dinner table, droopy eyes and mouth half ajar, her speech slurred. The coroner figured that she had been dead for hours by the time I found her on the couch that Sunday evening. "You could tell," he said, "by the purplish color on the bottom half of her thighs. It was ruled an accidental overdose." At the time, it didn't really occur to me that perhaps I could be complicit in something seriously fucked up, redirecting my own pain pills for somebody to OD on. I was so passive at this point in my life, going with the flow of whatever the universe threw at me. It was how I'd ended up riding around with Rodney in the first place, why I kept getting those prescriptions filled. Most days were spent driving around with no real destination in mind. Skinnerd and Metallica always on the radio. Rodney talked a big game about fishing, how he knew a few killer spots, but we never went. Lots of times we ended up at Mandy's place. She lived in a trailer at the bottom of a bottom, bordered on both sides by red dirt hills that had been washed away, a pump jack and tank battery nearby. We'd sit on her front porch that was welded out of steel pipe and scrap wood, smoke Mexican brickweed swag. This was back before the medicinal laws made it where could buy pot on any corner. Looking back, she was probably more attractive than I give her credit for. At the time, she kinda looked too old for me, a former beauty past her prime. She'd come out on the porch barefoot, cut-off denim shorts and a sports bra, midriff always exposed. The skin of her stomach was loose and crisscrossed with the faint lines of old stretch marks, put there by the kids she no longer had custody of. The only thing she was fit to take care of nowadays was a blue pit bull, his head a grinning grey jack-o'-lantern while he tried to hump my leg. Inevitably, I'd be left on that front porch while Rodney and Mandy disappeared back into the trailer. Try to tune out the noises they made in there for the next 15 minutes. The way her fake staccato moans were perfectly separated like the beats on a metronome. Rodney always left that place happy, a spring in his step. We'd hit the road. There were more beers to be had. "She's never going to get her kids back, she keeps it up," Rodney said one time after we had left. Saw a little baggie of syringes by her nightstand. Said it was for her diabetic nephew. Psh! She ain't got no diabetic nephew. "I don't think she even wants them kids back. They're probably better off," I said, backwashing my beer back into the can. It didn't taste right anymore. "No joke. Hey, you ain't worried about catching something from her? All them needles and shit?" I asked. Roy just shrugged and cracked another beer, turned up the radio. Instead of the usual Metallica, a lone fiddle started playing over the stereo, a loud, mournful twang. "Fuck is this shit?" he said, twisting knobs and pounding the dash. The fiddle continued into a burst of static. A voice cut through. For whatever reason, we both sat transfixed, listening to this cartoony guy spout off nonsense. "Good afternoon, my little layabouts, and what a lovely afternoon it is." It's the kind of day where you don't clock back in after lunch and spend the rest of the afternoon playing hooky down at the old fishing hole. What better way than to forget about a crappy mess at work than to catch a whole mess of crappy, am I right? But then again, maybe you two fellas don't know much about that, given your current situation. Far be it from me to judge. Old Bucky never found a loophole he didn't like, and he certainly never liked working for the man and helping him get richer. All that said, there's something to the purpose of an honest day's work that makes you stand a little taller and piss a little straighter. Find something you can believe in and set off towards it, steady as a herd of turtles. Speaking of turtles, that reminds me of today's rule of the road. Turtles are important. Did you know that many cultures believe that the very world itself balances itself on the back of a giant turtle? It's what keeps the earth from plummeting into oblivion. But what about the giant turtle itself? What keeps it from falling? Why another turtle? Silly. And below him another. It's turtles all the way down. So with that background, on to the rule of the day. If at any point during your journey, were you to come across one of our slowpoke four-legged friends crossing the road, then you must pull over and help said shell-backed reptile get to the other side. Now I know what you're gonna say. You're gonna say, Bucky, I ain't touching no goldang terrapin. Their cloakers are teeming with salmonella. And to that I say, whoa, who said anything about touching a cloaca? Are times really that rough? But seriously, folks, so you don't want to carry the turtle across the road? To that I say, fine, whatever. You can have this one. You might get some bonus points for helping the turtle cross the road, but you don't have to. But I do urge you at the very least to avoid hitting the turtle with your vehicle. Swerve, straddle, brake, whatever you must. But do not hit that turtle, or else you just might not like it when it hits back. That's all I got today, folks. Once again, I'm Buck Hensley, and these are the rules of the road. Stay safe, stay steady, stay lonely. The car filled with a dull silence. Rodney sniffed, took a sip of beer and said, maybe you're onto something. Better get my head checked for syphilis, because that was some crazy shit. Were you hearing that? Yeah, I said. Good to know I ain't the only one. The day ended like so many before, an uneventful alcoholic haze, bedtime a barely remembered thing. It got to be where we were spending more of our backroading sessions heading over to Mandy's place. I was getting annoyed by this routine. We'd always have a chat and a toke and a beer on the porch. Rodney and Mandy would make their way inside while I was left to my own devices, either to fend off the advances of the stupid humping pit bull or to flip the channels on her satellite TV. I didn't even know how she afforded such a service. They started spending longer in the bedroom together. I could hear the low rumble of their pillow talk after they had fucked. I paced holes in the floor, pounded beers to kill the time. One time they'd spent a really long time in there and I pounded on the door, told Rodney I had to get. You ain't got shit to do, he responded lazily. Exactly, I said, ain't shit on TV. All right, we got us a little errand to run anyhow. Then it was the three of us, me riding shotgun and Mandy riding bitch, laying her head on Rodney's shoulder and rubbing her hand up and down his thigh. You'll kill the beers you got. Gonna be going through town in a bit, he said, patting his front shirt pocket, a bottle of pills rattling in there. Our destination turned out to be Arrowhead Apartments, the shittiest complex in town. It sat next to a few rows of tract housing that had been built for the sole purpose of Section 8. Made that place look like a gated community. Rodney honked at a few feral children that roamed the parking lot, simply laughed when one of them flipped him the bird. He parked next to a crumbling curb. Wait here, he told me. He crossed an overgrown patch of grass, stepping over faded Fisher-Price toys as he did, and knocked on the door of a ground-level apartment. A guy in a wife-beater and a woman came out. They talked a bit, and the man gestured to the apartment, glancing back over his shoulder at us. Rodney stepped inside. Next to me, Mandy just smoked a cigarette, leaned her head back on the bench seat with her eyes closed. After a few minutes, a little kid not more than 3 or 4 years old came outside, squatted in the dirt. Fuck, I couldn't help but say. What? Mandy asked, eyes still closed. Nothing. I decided right then and there I was done. No more backroading with Rodney. No more giving him my pain pills for him to sell. No more of whatever this was. There was nothing forcing me to stay like this. I'd been dealt a lot of bad hands, but I could walk away from the table, make my way through the rows of slot machines, burst through them double doors of the casino and out into the blinding sunlight. It might take a while to adjust to the blinding glare, but I'd get there. Eventually, Rodney made it out of the apartment with a skip in his step, tousling the little kid's hair as he passed. "No lowballing," he said, sliding behind the wheel. He slapped Mandy in the face with his newly acquired money stack. "Hey, Dick," she said. "Any of that mine?" I asked. "Shit, Evan, you ain't forked over anything in a while." It was little relief. Whether I was here or not, this transaction was going to happen. Still, I'd sat back and watched. But what could I honestly do? Call DHS? Maybe. We pulled away from the apartment complex, took the highway headed out of town, before pulling off a random country road. Miles down the road, a mischievous glint caught the light in Rodney's eye. I could tell he was getting looser, the beers catching up with him, delays in his reaction time, how he'd overcorrect when we'd be getting too close to the ditch, tires skidding on the gravel. "Rodney, man, need me to take the wheel?" I asked after his most recent fishtail. "No, I'm good. How about you drop me off? Just got to take a right up here and loop around across the low water bridge. I don't want to keep you two from doing what you want to be doing. Third wheel shit's getting old. I got to feed the horses anyway. Bill's in the hospital with his COPD. I'll swing Mandy by her place, then run you home. We got to talk about some things," he said. Whatever. The sun was getting all golden, the gravel road looking like a path to a heaven none of us would ever reach. "Well, looky here," Rodney said. He had seen it before me, the little box turtle plodding across the road. He gunned it. "Rodney! Rodney!" I was pounding the dash. "Don't hit it, Rodney! Don't fucking—" The little guy never had a chance. There was even hardly a bump. I looked back through the settling gravel dust to see the turtle laying in the road, its body looking like a crumpled can of Miller. 10 points, Rodney said. "Oh, Rodney, that wasn't nice," Mandy said. "The fuck, man. Little thing wasn't hurting no one. It's a cruel world." "Let me out," I said, my voice flat. "You serious? Over a little-ass turtle?" "Not just the turtle. Don't you remember the fucking rule? Like I need any more bad luck, Jesus, pull over," I said. He slid the truck to the side of the road, and I hopped out without saying another word. They sped away. For the most part, I was able to scoop up the turtle's body in one piece. Bits of gravel blended in the bloody cracks of its shattered and flattened shell. I carried it across the road and left it in the ditch. Maybe this would count for something. Or maybe it was just a meaningless act in a meaningless universe. It was meaninglessness all the way down, not turtles. A couple miles from home, a friendly farmer in overalls gave me a lift. After feeding the horses, I opened my medicine cabinet. There were still about 500 pills in there. I uncapped their lids, dumped the tablets in the toilet, then flushed them into oblivion. I wandered over to the kitchen and heated up a can of SpaghettiOs, sat at my rickety kitchen table, spooning them into my mouth straight from the pot. Outside, a frantic honking made its way down the gravel drive. I stepped out onto my front porch to see Rodney's truck making a sliding Dukes of Hazzard-style stop. He hopped out, panicked. His shirt was covered in blood. Long lacerations traveled his forearms like a map. "Rodney, what the fuck?" I asked, stepping down from the porch. "Bill got that AR handy, the one he uses for hogs?" "Yeah, he's got a gun safe in his bedroom, never locks it. What the hell's going on?" Rodney looked down at his bloody arms, then back over his shoulder, paced around in a circle. "That damn dog of Mandy's went fucking nuts. We were just fooling around, still dressed for the most part, and it fucking leaps on her, goes ballistic. This is all from me trying to rip it off." I looked closer at his truck. There were flecks of blood splattered all along his hood, his doors, his tires. Bits of meat and gristle dotted the windshield. "Wait, it got Mandy." I craned my neck to look in the truck's cab. "Where's she at? She okay?" Something wasn't adding up. In the far-off distance I could hear a weird noise, a steady clomping. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard, how I imagine a fleet of marching soldiers might sound, a slow-mo stampede. I moved closer to the truck, stood on my tiptoes to get a better look at the cab. Inside, Mandy lay slumped over across the seat. "Rodney, what?" I didn't see it coming. The haymaker he threw. I was out like a light. I came to on the porch, my wrists and ankles duct taped to a plastic patio chair. Mandy's body had been dragged out into the driveway, the gravel around her wet with her blood. She lay face down, only wearing her jean shorts and a bra. Chunks of her flesh had been bitten from her thighs and lower back. One of her feet was a mangled mess, like it had been caught in a lawnmower. The strange sound I had heard earlier was louder, a wall of noise marching down the drive, a swarm of scraping and crunching. "Rodney!" I yelled, jerking at my restraints. "It wasn't the dog that did it," he said. His voice came loud and clear from above me. He was on the roof of the trailer. I looked up but couldn't see him, could only see the edge of the roof from my current position. "I ain't a total piece of shit," he said. "I tried to save her, dragged her ass through the busted bedroom window. That's how come I'm all cut up like I am. Her too, although it's them bites that did the most damage." The noise grew louder, a squirming darkness on the horizon. She was going down on me. I was getting into it and my eyes were closed, when all of a sudden she lets out the most god-awful scream. Something had bit her foot. Hard. She topples backward, grabbing at her foot, falls to the floor. She stands up and they're already on her. She's screaming louder, trying to shake them off. And now they're pouring through the fucking doorway, stacked on top of each other, clawing at each other to get in. The big kind. Alligator snappers, as you can no doubt see up ahead. I looked toward the cattle guard that marked the entrance of the property. There they were, blotting out the ground with their mass, making it look like the ground was a living, breathing thing. How many of them were there? Hundreds? Thousands? More? I could no longer see the road behind them. A gunshot rang out from the roof. A turtle went airborne, shell tumbling through the air, spiraling out blood and meat from its body. The horde of snappers stopped their forward march momentarily. I shimmied in my chair, the flimsy plastic legs twisting every which way. It's not like this was a brand new chair. Brittleness had to have set in during its months of neglect out on the front porch in the summer heat. "Sorry about all this, buddy. Not like I planned to come out here and fuck you over." Soon as I got Mandy in the truck, I tried to head out to the highway. There was a fucking tidal wave of them, flying up my tires and crawling over the hood. Everywhere I tried to go, it's just like the guy said. Turtles all the way down, Rodney said. He fired a couple more rounds. Each shot was a hit. It was hard to miss. Jesus, Rodney, if you hadn't run over that turtle, none of this would be happening. I see that now. Way I figure it, maybe they'll be happy once they get Mandy. She was in the truck. If not you, I guess. That's 2 out of 3. That ought to make 'em happy. If not, can't say I didn't try. "Fuck you," I said, rocking my chair back and forth, pulling with all my strength. A volley of gunfire rattled 20 feet above my head. My ears rang. Down on the gravel drive, turtles exploded, somersaulted through the air in eruptions of shell and blood and gore. Still they came. Their stubby arms pulled their bodies forward, wild eyes and gaping mouths, hissing while their alligator tails swished behind them. I'd seen turtles such as these before, yeah. Alligator snapping turtles, they called them. They looked mean as fuck. Weird button eyes that zeroed right in on you. A mouth that could open wide enough to swallow a cantaloupe, with a spiky tooth smack dab in the middle. Rodney fired some more, cursed. Soon, a magazine clattered to the porch right beside me. It was completely full. He must have accidentally kicked it down from his rooftop position. The advancing tide of turtles was mere feet away from Mandy's body. Once they got past her, it would be 100 more feet or so to me. Turtle shells cracked open in explosions of red mist and cartilage. More bodies flew through the air. It was as if there was a row of landmines outlining Mandy's body to prevent them from encroaching on her. But there were just too many of them. They washed over her, started chomping at her legs and thighs, flesh pulled from bone. I thought the wet smacking noise would be enough to make me vomit. But when they got to her belly, and the blood pooled there like a dog bowl, and she suddenly sprang up like a jack-in-the-box and let out this awful shriek, that's when I leaned over and retched my SpaghettiOs all over the porch and my shoes. Rodney let out a startled burst of gunfire, put her out of her misery. Her head blew apart like so many turtle shells. I was lucky I had vomited. Having my head down there by my lap made me realize how mobile I was. A light bulb went off in my head. I was free to move my head to my wrist, meaning I could make like a snapping turtle and chomp away. Rodney wasn't relenting now. He was firing as fast as he could, a non-stop assault of noise, the gravel driveway slick with blood. Soon there was silence, and everything paused. I looked up from my duct tape meal. The turtles had quit moving, the smell of gunpowder and blood in heavy in the air. A truce? No, simply a break in the action. They marched onward. I had an arm free. A feral scream of frustration shot out from the roof. Rodney hurled curses and empty magazines into the writhing crowds of turtles. He was out of ammo. The AR-15 soon followed. The stock struck the bumper of his Chevy, cartwheeled to the base of the porch. It leaned against the stairs. They were mere yards away and coming fast. I had both hands free, a leg. I dragged that plastic chair like a ball and chain, grabbed the rifle, reached down and snapped the chair leg off in a fit of adrenaline. Popping the magazine that Rodney had dropped earlier into the magwell, I was locked and loaded. I stood up on the wooden rail of my little front porch, hoisted myself onto the roof. I didn't need help for this part. Climbing roofs was in my blood. There was Rodney, sitting on the corner of the trailer house, feet dangling off. He was smoking a cigarette and staring out at the angry sea of turtles with a dejected look on his face. He looked over at me, bored. "Well, shit," he said, flicking his butt into the turtles. "Should have had you bring me a beer." I said nothing, just shouldered the rifle and held it on him. The snappers had us surrounded, were clawing at the sides of the trailer, using each other's bodies as ladders. From above, I bet it looked like an ice cream sandwich in the middle of an anthill. Rodney stood up, wiped his hands together. Even up here with a gun held on him, he still cast an imposing figure. "I ever tell you I sold your ma her final batch?" "No. She didn't have the money, so we worked out a deal. She was a goddamn whore. Wanted it in her ass. Begged me to do it that way." The barrel of the AR-15 drooped. My arms went as rubbery as a garden hose. I blinked away a tear. It took all I had to not squeeze off a few rounds in his chest. But I knew what he was doing. He was trying to commit suicide by ex-friend. A bullet to the head or heart would be a much easier way to go out than being devoured by turtles. I wouldn't grant him that pleasure. You may think you're big and bad, but if someone fires several rounds at your feet, you're bound to take a step or two back out of reflex. It's inevitable. And when you're on a roof, you should always be mindful of your footing. I should know. That's more or less what happened. I have to hand it to old Rodney. After he fell into the mass of turtles, he didn't go easily. He went down swinging and flinging, even though they clung to his forearms, swinging from the shreds of meat that hung from his biceps. He still tried to take out as many as he could. And when there was no fight left in him, when his legs gave way and the threshing beasts engulfed him and were pleased with his total evisceration, the sea of turtle parted. They turned tail and waddled down the road, disappeared over the horizon, the sun shining golden on their spiky backs. I hate this next part for my involvement in it, but what else was I supposed to do? Under cover of night, I drove Rodney's truck into a remote part of Hickory Creek at the bottom of Bug Scuffle Hill. This was after I had loaded up his and Mandy's bodies to ride passenger with me. They weren't heavy in their semi-skeletonized state. I set fire to the truck's gas tank, the engine, their bodies. The nearest house was 2 miles away, and the creek was heavy with thick brush and trees. It would be a while before this got called in. I walked hours back to my place, crossed pastures and creeks and barbed wire. I feel bad for doing this, especially when it comes to Mandy, but nobody would believe the truth, and I was liable to get charged somehow. No more disability for me. No more roofs either. I enrolled in some classes at the local Votech. Nursing, if you can believe it. Nancy, she was an inspiration. I've been working 5 years as a licensed practical nurse now. Gonna try to figure out how to get my RN someday, if I'm smart enough. My ankle still hurts like a son of a bitch. Everything else I went through, that hurts too. And I'm not going to say that the pain will make you stronger or any of that other motivational crap like that. It can wear you down, make you complacent, make you want to hide away and give up. I know because it did this to me. And when it was all said and done, and I somehow made it through the other side, the pain didn't go away. It is still here, but so am I. Entry 1, Thursday, January 6th, 2022. All right, I cannot believe I'm stooping to this level, but quite frankly, there isn't much else to do. I could ruminate over my inauspicious circumstances, wallow in self-pity, and listen for any indication of life above my head. See how far I can spit. Perhaps with some practice I'd reach the rat droppings, At least I think they're rat droppings. And at the other end of the room. But then again, I'd require head momentum, which is in limited supply these days. Defecate and assess whether rashes truly form quicker on chafed skin. Over the past 4 days, I'd already done all of those things. Multiple times. Well, except for that last one. Shitting myself once proved to be plenty. I'd hoped it'd provide a pretense to see more of the house, but Mrs. Ingram took one whiff and said she'd let me stew in it to teach me a lesson. And teach me a lesson it had. After sitting in my own dung for a couple of days, I was much obliged to relieve myself into the bucket she brought by twice a day. Once after breakfast and once after dinner, she coached, her expression indecipherable, as though she had done this a million times prior. Your bladder will adapt with time. An objection bubbled up in my throat, but Mrs. Ingram wagged her index finger like I was a snot-nosed kindergartner gnawing on a piece of Jenga. 5 more days, her eyes flickered, like we agreed. 5 days. Even Aaron Ralston lasted longer than that in 127 hours, although of course he wasn't getting hash browns served to him at breakfast. Granted, at this point I'd been here for 5 days already, and as for my alleged consent, well, I took her word for it. See, the contextual clues were sparse enough as it was. The flashy New Year's party I'd attended with the other writers from the magazine was the last thing I remembered. Janine had gotten pissed drunk and passed out in one of the bathroom stalls. Even the Armani floor tiles couldn't save her teeth. I spent the first 2 hours of 2022 camped out on a bench near the hospital entrance with a makeshift flask and a packet of smokes for company. When my sight was obscured by a black duffel, I suppose I could have simply passed out from the booze. 3 jacks, 7 tequila shots, and some obscure German lager certainly made that a feasible possibility. All the same, though, the suffocating wool against my skin, the flutter of stomach acid, the subtle scent of chloroform, or was it the cherry vodka in my flask? My body was already neatly strapped in when I awoke, secured to what felt like an adjustable examination table, my back pinned straight with only minor leeway for movement. In retrospect, it wasn't all too uncomfortable, or at least I could appreciate how it could have been much worse. My ankles appeared to be clamped down, but my hands were mostly free to roam. Not that there was much point in ploughing the air. Still, I thrashed about like the big man I was, until the sentiment sunk in and I settled down enough to examine my surroundings. The room was dimly lit, but bright enough for me to make out its fissured ceiling and coarse, discolored walls. Wooden racks towered against them, laden with books, boxes, and plastic rubbish bags. I could not see a door, but a narrow ascending staircase suggested that it was simply out of my line of sight. All in all, the room resembled a run-of-the-mill cellar. "Hello?" I called out, the back of my throat plastered with cigarette tar. Well, the health warnings on the packs had certainly delivered. "Hello? Anyone there?" Footsteps feathered the top of the stairs and began their gradual descent. I held my breath. If there was a door at the top of the stairs, it had never opened. Whoever the footsteps belonged to had been hiding out in the darkness and listening, waiting. "Oliver?" Her voice was surprisingly demure, dwindling my expectation of a callous executioner into obscurity. Perhaps this was a contemporary remake of the Hostel series. Inclusivity is popular nowadays. Surely, this woman was just as capable of cutting my face off as the guy in the movie. Better even, with cleaner cuts. I'd read somewhere that women have steadier hands, although I couldn't actually see her. Whoever she was, she remained shrouded by darkness. Oliver Cohen? I gawked as she moved close enough for the amber ceiling light to touch her face. She wasn't nearly as delicate as her voice had made her seem. Standing at about 5'9", she was stout and in her early 50s. Her greying hair was pulled into a tight bun, and the short-sleeved blouse she wore under her white apron showcased a pair of well-built arms. "Oliver," she repeated, a sudden curtness in her tone indicating her capacity for pleasantries was running out. "Yes," I smacked my dry lips, "Oliver." She took a step closer, and I recoiled about 2 inches, which was just about as far as my confines would allow. A waft of body odor emanated from beneath the collar of my shirt. "Wait, don't. What do you... Where am I?" Concern shrouded her expression, and I couldn't help thinking how in any other context, this woman would have surely been the protagonist. It's all right, son. She held out her outstretched palms, an overt demonstration of benevolence. It's only a temporary arrangement. Where am I? I demanded, doing my best to keep my tone from wavering. She exhaled slowly as she considered my question. You're in the Ingram home, she said eventually. Our guest. A patch of goose flesh cropped up beneath my shirt as I mulled over the very real possibility the woman in front of me was clinically insane. Did she, or they, make it a habit to chain their guests in the cellar? If so, I needed to change my tactics, and fast. Mrs. Ingram, I spoke with the cadence of a seasoned reporter, praying she wouldn't pick up on the quiver in my voice. Can you tell me what happened? I felt like a fool and sounded even worse, but Mrs. Ingram didn't bat an eye. You showed up at Hopley Hospital late last night with your friend, she stated just as matter-of-factly. The girl with missing teeth. Janine, I muttered under my breath. She'd be wondering where in God's name I'd disappeared to. While you were in the waiting area, my colleague Anita asked if she could put you down for a social experiment conducted by our neurology department. She paused as if to give me a chance to object, but I knew better than that. We were thrilled when you agreed to partake. A decade of journalism experience couldn't distill the stunned silence that ensued. She was lying to me, deceiving me right to my face. Sure, I'd been inebriated, but not to the degree I'd do something that extends so far beyond my comfort zone, and not nearly enough to forget the chloroform duffel over my face. But wait, did she say neurology department? Could she be lying to me on purpose? Was this a part of the experiment? Was that even legal? I thought back to the Milgram experiment I'd researched a couple of months prior. Was all this but a cleverly designed simulation? And this experiment... My chest felt tighter now, and the odor under my shirt considerably more pungent. Social experiment, she corrected, observing me with keen interest. It will run for a total of 10 days. No action is required on your part. You are to remain where you are for the entire duration. You will spend the first 5 days acclimating to your surroundings, but the 5 that follow will be a little more stimulating. Nothing in her tone suggested malice, but the way she said it unnerved me. I swallowed. Well, what's on day 5? It seemed as though my apparent fear amused her. Nothing to be concerned about, she smiled. You'll only have to do the thing you do best. An intricate web of scenarios spun through my mind. She'll ask me to fuck her, won't she? No. That's really weird. Oliver, why even think that? She'll probably use me as a piece of furniture. That's a kink, isn't it? That must be why she's keeping me in this position. To prep me for... I could see her eyeing me with blatant curiosity. I thought you were a journalist. What? I sputtered, my brain working overtime to connect the two. I mean, yes I am. How in God's grass-fed earth did she know that? At least that's what you indicated in the form you filled out, she added sheepishly, but her eyes gleamed. You work for Affleur magazine? I nodded, despite having no recollection of filling out any form. Of course, I wasn't exactly a cashier at a local newsagent. Affleur was a substantial publication with global offices, its own television channel, and Armani-tiled bathrooms. Perhaps she simply recognized me. Was the deceit purposeful? Could I have really signed off on something I don't remember? In that case, the second part of the experiment should be a breeze. The corners of Mrs. Ingram's mouth quivered, as though she was stifling a smile. All you'll have to do is write. In spite of myself, I heaved a sigh of relief as the mental images of senile pornography and human furniture ebbed from my mind. Right. All I'll have to do is write. Entry 2. Friday, January 7th, 2022. You know, at first I employed methodical defiance. I mean, despite her best efforts to convince me, I was certain that, wasted or sober, I had never explicitly agreed to be locked up in Mrs. Ingram's cellar. Social experiment, my ass. Why should I bother adhering to any of her demands, even if it was as natural to me as writing? Granted, I started with a measured approach. I figured that if this really was a social experiment, I should be able to withdraw my consent at any point, right? During the Milgram experiment, its participants were led to believe that their involvement was compulsory, despite that not being the case. So, I figured all I really had to do was keep asking, but Mrs. Ingram's continued denial of my requests to opt out of the cellar newsletter only upped my resolve. eventually resulting in the infamous butt rash. After that ill-famed day, I gave up my feeble attempts at protest. I figured that under the autocratic cellar rule, dissent would do more harm than good. "Anything you want," she told me, after I'd inquired whether she wanted a specific genre. "I am not the target audience." She refused to elaborate further. But she wasn't exactly asking me to run a dairy farm. I was a journalist. For God's sake, I could write. And what's more, I could not refute the possibility that Mrs. Ingram was, in fact, crazy. While no expert on human psychology, I was certain that tantrums and retaliation were ill-advised when dealing with nutjobs. If writing several journal entries was what was required to complete this alleged social experiment, then wouldn't I be extending my stay by demonstrating overt non-compliance? I grew bored, painfully so. So, I picked up the plastic pen and notepad Mrs. Ingram had graciously supplied me with, and started writing, assuring myself that my entries would put Stephen King's Misery to shame. I mean, my situation was inherently worse, wasn't it? Paul Sheldon hadn't been tied to a chair. Wait, had he? I mean, I guess my legs weren't broken, yet. And Mrs. Ingram wasn't demanding I write an entire novel yet. But, "Hello," a nasally voice said. My eyes shot up from my page. "Who are you?" I squinted into the darkness in front of me. A young man was watching me from the middle of the staircase, about 25. He sported an Adidas shirt and a botched goatee. The pen was suddenly slick between my fingers. "I'm Oliver." The man seemed to deliberate this for a moment. "Oh, okay. Okay? Just okay?" He wasn't at all surprised to find a man tied to a chair in his basement. And what is your name?" I asked, as colloquially as I could muster. He seemed distant and uninvested. I typically encountered this when interviewing children, and knew a change of tone was in order. I haven't seen you around." He shrugged. "I'm not allowed to come down here." I stared at him in stunned silence. Wasn't the guy going on 30? "You know," he cleared his throat, "I really hope you're the one. Mum's tired." A slow chill started creeping up my spine, and I held my breath, waiting for him to elaborate, but he stood silent. So this was the son, I thought. His gauche posture and disheveled appearance set him apart quite a bit from his mother. I realized a little too late that he had disregarded my initial question, but somehow his name no longer seemed relevant. "What do you mean, I'm the one?" I tried to keep my voice level. One of the key principles of interviewing children was maintaining a positive approach while using clear and concise language. And yet the man in front of me was not a child. And what the hell did he mean by "Mom's tired"? "Gordon." Mrs. Ingram's voice sounded at the top of the stairs. "Gordon, didn't I tell you not to go down there? Come here this instant." Gordon held my gaze for a moment, and then turned on his heel, obediently trudging back up the stairs. Just before the door slammed shut, I overheard Mrs. Ingram hiss, "Go play with your train set until dinner." I stared into darkness, my head ringing. "What the fuck?" I whispered to whatever skeletons lurked in the darkness of the Ingram home. "What the actual fuck?" Mrs. Ingram came downstairs again during dinner. "I apologize for the earlier misunderstanding." Her tone was laced with sympathy. "I've told my son countless times not to disturb our guests. But, well, I suppose curiosity is the wick in the candle of learning." She paused as if waiting for me to bring up the other famous saying about curiosity. When I didn't, she continued. "Gordon has," she trailed off, "a condition. Social cues are challenging for him." I wondered what she expected me to say. I mean, this certainly shed some light on the peculiar mother-son dynamic I'd witnessed earlier, but didn't explain the meaning behind Gordon's strange phrasing. Still, I sure as hell wasn't going to ask Mrs. Ingram about it. "I'm sorry," I mumbled. But she shook her head. "No need to be sorry. We have our hurdles, but we manage. I am doing all that I can to give Gordon the life he deserves." She dabbed her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "Here now, eat. You must be starving. I will come by later with your bucket." Entry 3, Saturday, January 8th, 2022. Gordon snuck downstairs again the following day. Albeit having no real means of telling the time, I knew it must have been early. At first I thought it was Mrs. Ingram with my breakfast, and in spite of myself I perked up. Mrs. Ingram was a fantastic cook, serving up full homemade meals 3 times a day without fail. Her breakfasts were particularly immaculate, with strips of crispy bacon, sunny-side-up eggs, and golden hash browns. "You need to keep your energy up," Mrs. Ingram remarked, loosening the stiff restraint around my neck. "Mental labor is labor." Honestly, the food was so good, I wouldn't have minded if the Ingrams were in fact trying to fatten me up for their own Thanksgiving feast. Almost jittery with delight, I drew in a lungful of air in hopes of smelling what she'd cooked for me that day. My jaw clenched at his nasal greeting, but my disappointment was promptly replaced with frenzy. Without so much as a head nod, I ranked my questions in terms of importance and perceived appropriateness. Mrs. Ingram had been visibly upset the previous night, and her family history seemed no less than harrowing. Perhaps her son simply longed for light conversation, some non-committal small talk with a stranger. Maybe instead of over-analyzing his remarks, I ought to be focusing on my upcoming release. After all, I technically only had to endure 2 more days of this. Today didn't go. "Hello," Gordon repeated louder, an edge to his tone. "Are you sleeping?" His question confused me since I was certain he could see that I was awake. Wait, he wasn't blind, was he? "Hello, Gordon." I raised my hand as if to test my theory. He responded with the same, and I heaved a sigh of relief. "What are you doing up so early?" "I came to say goodbye." Alarms blared in my mind. "Goodbye?" He nodded solemnly, turning on his heel and heading back upstairs, when I realized the gravity of my mistake. "No, Gordon, don't go. I was just... Look, I'm not sure I caught your I'm not sure what you meant." He paused, uncertainty etched into his lips. "Goodbye," he enunciated, as if he thought I was dense. "Goodbye and good luck." Gordon flashed a toothy smile and stuck out a thumbs-up sign, as if I'd just won a free milkshake at a drive-thru. "Gordon," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, Do you know why I'm here?" He nodded eagerly. "My mum is a doctor." This didn't clear anything up, so I tried again. "Gordon, every time I come here, there's a new one," he piped up again. "A new man that needs help." I blinked, my lungs suddenly devoid of air. "Help?" He furrowed his brow. "Mum said you're very sick." "What do you have?" "But My throat was dry. "I'm not sick." Gordon let out a nasally chortle. "If Mum can fix you," he said, matter-of-factly, "then all will be well. She is a doctor, and that is what she says sometimes. All will be well. But if she can't..." A thud sounded upstairs, and Gordon shot an apprehensive glance towards the door. "I have to go now," he said, pressing his index finger to his lips. With that, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving me with a myriad of unanswered questions, a stripe of gooseflesh, and a creeping sense of impending doom. Entry 4, Sunday, January 9th, 2022. "You haven't written very much," Mrs. Ingram remarked, looking over my measly bundle of pages. I was expecting a bit more from an up-and-coming journalist. I was about to tell her that this up-and-coming journalist got to drink first-rate brandy on weekdays and ride in limousines with C-list actors, but decided to hold my tongue. She didn't seem like the type to be impressed by lavish booze and celebrity gossip. "Sorry," I muttered. "I'll get more done tonight." But Mrs. Ingram shook her head. "I am afraid we are out of time. You'll have to do it during the procedure." My blood ran cold. "But what procedure?" I was convinced she'd get me to do something light-hearted like sign my release forms, but her expression was deadpan. "It's time, Oliver." She placed a hand on my shoulder, causing an immediate outbreak of goosebumps. "Your 10 days are almost up. Time to see if the effort was worth it." I gawked at her, stupefied. "What do you mean?" But she was silent, turning her back to me and retrieving a cardboard box from one of the wooden shelf compartments. "I am a trained surgeon," she affirmed, as though this was somehow a redeeming factor. "So you are in capable hands. Brain surgery is my bread and butter at Hopley Hospital, although the typical procedure is not quite." Blood seeped into my eyelids, painting the entire room a bright red hue. "Wait!" I protested. "Brain surgery? Mrs. Ingram, please, seriously, look, I don't need..." But she raised her palm. "I know." There was a moment of deafening silence. "I know you don't need brain surgery, Oliver," she said once the quiet got too much to bear. "But my son Gordon does need a new brain. His condition has no known cure, and..." She turned away again to rummage through the box she had picked up, but I could hear the rigidity in her jaw as she continued, "And as his mother, I have to find one." Desperation filled my lungs. "Look, ma'am, I have money. Lots of it. I can fund research for your son's condition, hire the best professionals, write dozens of articles to spread awareness. I can... And what good will bringing awareness do, Miss? Ingram's voice was icy cold. My Gordon doesn't need his face plastered across the front page. He needs a new brain. Her grave expression spoke volumes, but she wouldn't relent. And not just any brain, she barked. He must have the best. Mrs. Ingram began arranging medical instruments on the counter beside me. My heart sank as I caught a glimpse of electrical tools, scalpels, and a device resembling a dilator. My brain isn't even close to being the best, I cried, in a feeble attempt to bargain with what little chips I had left. It's not even halfway decent. Mrs. Ingram, I smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day, and that's on a good day too. And I watch porn. Lots of porn. Have you heard of the one with the man and the jar? Or 2 girls, 1 cup? Well, I've jacked off to both of those. And there was another one with a horse, a black stallion. Your son doesn't need my brain, Mum. It's a total shitstorm up in there. Mrs. Ingram turned to meet my frantic gaze, clearly amused by my radical change in demeanor. Son, your brain is made up of, well, let's call them compartments for simplicity's sake. There's a designated space responsible for movement, personality, telling right from left, memory, the list goes on. I am not looking to take away your livelihood. The idea is that if the surgery goes according to plan, you'll get to keep your obscene memories. And Gordon will be able to use expressions such as halfway decent. She paused just as Gordon's words echoed in my mind. Every month there's a new one. Of course, you cannot both retain the same aptitude for language. She heaved a sigh. However, I'd say it is a small price to pay in the grand scheme of things. But please, I whispered, how many people have you... She shot me a reproving look as if she knew exactly what I was going to say next. I've tried a total of 8 times. Her tone was flat. Each failed because the brain matter dies before I can preserve it. But that's not an excuse to quit trying. Always remember that. Now you shouldn't feel a thing. I'll just tighten this strap right here. As she spoke, she pulled on the restraint around my neck, pressing my head firmly against the headrest. You should be lucid for the entire procedure. At least that was the way of things last time and the time before that. Here, I'll just numb your scalp, pop it open, take what we need, and you'll be all set. I seem to be fully numb already, without any anesthetic. Involuntary tears streamed down my cheeks, slipping beneath my shirt collar. And don't worry, Mrs. Ingram suddenly sounded considerably perkier. You can't actually feel your brain, so I'll ask you to continue writing, or actually that might not be too comfortable given your position. Careful now. We don't want tear stains on the pages, and I can't have you flailing about like this. Perhaps just finish up the entry now, and then we'll get to work. B. Entry 5. Monday, January the 10th, 2022. I was jolted awake by a pounding headache. Fighting the urge to poke through my throbbing temples, I ran my palm across my face. My beard was definitely getting out of hand, but I was still the same old me, only with extra whiskers. Reaching for the glass of water perched on the edge of the countertop, I noticed a couple of aspirin pills laid out next to it. As I popped them onto my parched tongue, I was suddenly overcome with an inordinate sense of gratitude. She'd done it. She really had. And what's more, I was alive. Squinting at the primitive light above my makeshift cot, I pulled the covers from my torso and swept a critical gaze over my body. I certainly seemed to be in one piece, save for a few brain cells. Probably. Ah! I called out, half expecting to discover a critical error in my voice, but no, still all there. I couldn't shake the deep sense of gratitude I felt. In fact, I suddenly found myself grappling with emotions more profound than I could fully grasp. Was this what Stockholm Syndrome felt like? But wait, Stockholm Syndrome, wouldn't that only apply to those in captivity? As promised, the surgery had been totally painless. The entire process was explained to me as it was happening. I learned the names of all the instruments used for the surgery and was even allowed to hold the hemostatic forceps. Suddenly, brain surgery seemed like a ride along a lazy river. The waiting had, without a shadow of a doubt, been the most terrifying part. I couldn't help raising my brows and mouthing, "That's it," to a cluster of imaginary spectators awaiting their turn in the fabled chair of doom. My stomach rumbled, demanding sustenance. I wondered what was on the menu this morning. I could have killed for some hash browns and sausage. What time was it? My gaze swiveled to the leftmost side of the room. There he was, still and serene, his eyes gently closed, clearly fast asleep. A trickle of dried blood stamped across his temple. He looked so peaceful, so tranquil. As I jotted down my innermost thoughts in the journal that was set out in front of me, I couldn't help feeling pleasantly surprised by the aptitude of my own skill. It seemed as though words were flowing through me in a way they never had before. I thought back to the internet forums I'd frequent that, try as I might, I'd never had the capacity to engage with, and wondered if this time might be different. Perhaps these entries would be my ticket to being part of the outside world. "Look, Mum." I flashed the open journal at her as she descended the stairs laden with a wooden breakfast tray. Maybe now I can be a writer too. They say seeing is believing, but if I'd followed that advice, I'd be dead now. It was a deaf-blind friend who first told me there was someone in the house with me. I scoffed. I didn't believe him. I looked out across the wide, open, empty living room. I looked upstairs in the den and spare bedroom and out at the patio and in the kitchen. It was just the two of us. But my friend, Will, insisted. While he was sitting on the base of the stairs, tracing his fingers along the ornate sculpted banister, I went upstairs to grab something from the den. He felt another set of footsteps on the stairs after mine, following me up. He told me afterward in sign language when we Saturday down at the table for tea. Then he asked me who else was here. I chuckled, my fingers tickling his leg in laughter, and told him he must have imagined it. But he claimed he could smell them. When I asked him to describe the smell, he said it smelled bad, a sort of garbage smell, someone who needed a bath or hung out in the trash. Maybe my trash needed to go out, I said, and insisted it was just us. Are you sure? He and I were supposed to be working on the script for a game we were developing together, but he interrupted my suggestions to exclaim, "There, do you smell it?" I didn't smell a thing, nor did I see anyone in the living room with us. Does your nose actually work, or is it just a decoration on your face? Will burst, exasperated. When I dropped him off back at his apartment later after we'd finished our work together, as he was getting out of the car, he warned me again that I definitely have another person hiding somewhere in my home. His hands described the feel to me, 2 fingers of his right hand walking up my arm toward my shoulder, 2 fingers of his left following behind, softer. Then he tapped his hand along my arm, showing me the feel of the vibration. First heavier, more solid, my steps, and then lighter, but still palpable. The second set of steps following mine and vibrating the wooden stairs. I patted his arm in affirmation and told him I'd search the house when I got home. "Be careful," he said, his signing emphatically slow, and gave my arm a final squeeze before tapping his way to the front of his building with his white cane. As soon as I got home, I searched the house. But I couldn't imagine where an intruder might conceal themselves. It was a council house, 2 levels with small square footage. The rent was suspiciously low, but I chalked that up to the lack of AC, creaky pipes, and age of the place. I looked under the sink, in the closets, in the cupboards, in the spare bedroom. I even bought a camera and set it up, but all I captured overnight was myself sleepwalking. I vaguely remembered waking on the staircase and returning to bed. Other than that, the motion capture didn't turn on. According to the video, I was alone in my house. Still, the next morning I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. It said that if you lose one sense, your others become sharper to compensate. But what if the reverse is also true? Was my reliance on my eyes causing my brain to shut out my other senses? What if I tried closing my eyes? It seemed silly. Even so, on a whim, that evening I went around the house wearing a blindfold. I was feeling my way through the kitchen, filling a glass with water from the sink when I felt the presence of someone. I couldn't pinpoint why. I just had the sense of not being alone. The hairs on my neck rose, and suddenly I was absolutely certain someone was coming up behind me. I snatched off my blindfold. Just me. Still, the feeling lingered for a moment, those goosebumps persisting on my arms. I put the blindfold back on and puttered around in the kitchen for a while. It was then I noticed the smell, like rotten meat. like unwashed flesh, spoiled and awful, and it was so faint, just wafting occasionally. The hairs on the nape of my neck stood up. I went upstairs, trying to follow the smell, but I lost it almost immediately when I went into my den. I came back downstairs, my fingers lightly tracing the wall. Thud, thud, thud. I stopped because I felt footsteps behind me. Felt the soft reverberation on the wooden staircase, just a beat after my own. It was just like Will had described to me. Someone was here. Right behind me, I felt cold breath on my ear. I tore off the blindfold and whirled around. The staircase was empty. That night, as I lay in bed, I had trouble drifting to sleep. I was afraid of what might happen overnight, and sure enough, I woke up on the stairs, sleepwalking. But instead of returning to bed, I tried to keep myself in that dreamy state, and I held my eyes closed. My arm was cold. It took me a moment to realize that someone was holding my hand. A touch of icy fingers drawing me forward, those dead fingers leading me up the stairs. Every instinct told me to tear my hand away and run, but I let the dead hand guide me up until I was on the landing. The rotten smell made my eyes water as the door to the spare bedroom opened. An overwhelming sense of dread made it hard to breathe as the hand guided me across the room. Then my fingers touched the cool handle to the balcony door and pushed the door open, fresh air gusting around me. I yanked back, terror shooting through me, and rushed for the light switch. I was alone again. I'm now looking for a new place to live. Will is right. I'm not alone, and my life is in danger every night I stay here. I've got to get out as soon as I can, but my budget is tight, and housing is scarce in this area. So until I find a place, I've installed a bolt on the balcony doors and moved a heavy bookcase in front of them, and I've locked that spare bedroom. You see, I did some research and found out that the tenant who lived here before me died by hanging himself from the balcony of the upstairs bedroom. Before him, there was an old woman who lived here with her daughter, and the daughter was also found hanging. In fact, I don't know how many people before me have died here, seemingly by taking their own lives. The house is not reported to be haunted, because no one has ever seen a ghost here. But every day I feel someone in the house with me, their footsteps treading just behind mine. And every night those dead fingers take my hand and try to lead me out to the balcony. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.